Hey guys, tonight we are diving deep into that dark corner of history to uncover 16 disgusting hygiene practices and bizarre medical treatments associated with King Henry VIII. These stories are not merely recorded facts or woven legends, but undeniable evidence of how the obsession with power transformed a royal body into a rotting prison. Just imagine, a king who wielded absolute authority, who was seen as the very embodiment of God on earth. Could he truly have been the dirtiest and foulest-smelling man in his own kingdom? King Henry VIII represented the pinnacle of luxury and authority, yet behind the layers of expensive velvet, silk, and premium perfume lurked a terrifying secret: putrefaction. Courtiers only dared to whisper that the stench of illness and neglect clung to his palace so persistently that no amount of incense or fragrance could ever mask it. Not even a king could escape the decay of the flesh. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share with me in the comments. Where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it where you are right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The disgusting hygiene practice number 1, public virginity inspection. Within the shadowy expanse of the Tudor palace, beneath flickering candlelight and overpowering incense, the might of King Henry VIII appeared absolute, yet concealed a horrifying reality. Rot and malodorous air were the true masters here. The marble-tiled corridors and gold-leafed chambers served only as an elegant facade for a sanitation nightmare, where every breath taken by courtiers was punished by the scent of accumulated sweat, drifting incense, and counterfeit floral fragrances, vainly attempting to mask the stench of decaying flesh and the decline of royal splendor. Imagine yourself passing through the great doorway, inhaling slowly, only to have your nostrils assaulted by a blend of sweat, smoke, and fake flower scents. The servants, respectful yet secretly horrified, recount lurid tales of late assemblies, when the echo of wooden shoes in a distant corridor heralded the arrival of a new bride at the throne for her public virginity inspection, complete with bizarre, rank-smelling ointments, and the sovereign's whispered orders. Each layer of peeling cloth and every glance from the court physician drove shame and terror into the woman's heart. The moment of the public virginity inspection unfolded like a cruel theatrical spectacle. The bride, clad in a pale white gown beneath the soaring arches of the palace, stepped unsteadily in the dim candlelight, bearing the contemptuous stares of courtiers. Beside a cold stone table intended for ornamentation alone, lay polished wooden instruments, so rudimentary they sent shivers down the spine. What seemed simple in form, in the trembling hands of the royal physician bore the crushing authority to determine a woman's worth. The rustle of fabric merged with rapid breaths as the bride winced, lips trembling, while the physician, hands shaking, face drawn, proceeded in suffocating silence. One wrong murmur, and she faced not merely disgrace or exile, but the swift conclusion of her life by royal decree. Although no contemporary chronicle documents this ritual, and no parchment preserves its inked testament, the image remains seared into the collective imagination through later legends and manuscripts, standing as a gruesome testament to the union of absolute power and primordial cruelty. In a feudal milieu where a woman's body was inextricably tied to lineage, politics, and dynastic alliances, such a legend gained credibility. Storytellers embellished further, claiming the throne room was draped in white cloth embroidered with red roses, symbolically sacrificing the bride to the continuity of the realm. Whether born of reality or elaborate fiction, the rite reflected a society in which fear of authority spawned the most inhumane ceremonies, where human dignity was consumed in the fire of dominion. Yes, this is but the opening chapter in our account of the 16 most disgusting hygiene practices in history, yet this very moment serves as a stark reminder. No matter how dazzling the crown, once the flesh decays, even the magic of power cannot obscure the human stench of rot. In the ghostly half-light, amid the whispering draughts and the wavering glow of candles, we recognize that glory and brutality can never conceal the truth. That man, even a mighty monarch, remains a vulnerable being, fraught with fear and guided by superstition. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy, let this sleepy tale recede into darkness, making way for peaceful dreams where real strength lies not in imposed authority, but in compassion and understanding. The disgusting hygiene practice number 2, extended refusal to bathe. In the prevailing beliefs of Tudor England, hot water was feared as a conduit for disease, thought to open the pores and invite sickness into the body. King Henry VIII, who styled himself as God's earthly representative, firmly embraced this notion. He believed that immersing himself in a warm bath would beckon plague and pestilence. As a result, he might go for weeks, and on occasion for entire months, without washing his hair or bathing his body. Each morning before the sun had fully risen, his attendants would spend nearly a full hour draping him in fresh garments of velvet and damask, layering each piece meticulously to conceal the oils and sweat that had accumulated on his skin. These luxurious fabrics, heavy and insulating, trapped moisture against his flesh. Over time, the mingling of skin oils, perspiration, and the thickness of the cloths created an ever-present corporal odour. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones of the stifling atmosphere. The rank scent of unwashed skin blended with the weighty fragrance of silks and brocades, forming a suffocating haze that clung to ceilings and furniture alike. Medical treatises of the time noted that bathing was uncommon even among the nobility, but Henry's abstention surpassed the norm. The Great Plague outbreaks of the mid-14th century had left a cultural imprint, instilling the belief that water could carry miasmas. Physicians of the Tudor court cautioned against the use of hot water, advising that it might allow malignant humours to penetrate vulnerable pores. Yet no advocate of reason could prevail against the king's conviction. His personal physicians, fearing royal displeasure, did not dare to challenge his custom. Instead, they offered aromatic compresses, cloths soaked in rosewater and lavender, to dab at his temples and wrists, attempting to mitigate the worst of the odour without suggesting he bathe. By midday, the odour would settle into every room Henry entered. Visitors reported that even the imported frankincense candles, valued at £10 sterling per hundred, could not fully dispel the underlying sour tang of human sweat. Ambassadors recorded that audiences with the king required them to position seating as far from the throne as protocol would allow, all while clutching perfumed handkerchiefs to their faces. One French envoy wrote in his dispatch dated April 2nd, 1543, that he trembled at each breath for fear of contamination. When at last he permitted himself fresh attire, often only once per fortnight, the discarded garments were burned immediately. It was believed that flame could purify what water could not. Wardrobe stewards, under orders from the master of the household, maintained meticulous logs. 7 suits of doublet and hose were consumed by fire in the first 3 months of 1544 alone. The smouldering racks of charred fabric served as a grim reminder of the king's aversion to water and his empire of superstition. Despite the king's conviction, modern historians agree that abstaining from bathing for such extended periods would exacerbate skin conditions, promote bacterial overgrowth, and intensify body odour. Yet Henry insisted that every layer of cloth and every waft of scented smoke was preferable to the imaginary dangers of a simple bath. His practice stands as the pinnacle of bodily denial, a moment when fear overcame reason and superstition bound a monarch more tightly than any chain. The disgusting hygiene practice number 3, eating raw garlic as a talisman. In the drowsy hush of early morning, when the candlelight still dances on cold stone walls, King Henry VIII would enact an alarming ritual said to fortify him against every poison and plague. According to tradition, he placed unwavering faith in the humble garlic bulb, viewing it as a natural weapon against the most insidious conspiracies and maladies. Each dawn, without fail, he consumed 2 pounds of raw garlic, sometimes roughly crushed with mortar and pestle, other times coarsely chopped by hand, and dissolved the pungent mash in a goblet of spiced wine, creating what he regarded as a potent appetizer before his formal breakfast. The moment the king raised that goblet to his lips, a fierce aroma would sweep through the audience chamber. The sharp, sulphurous tang of garlic blended discordantly with the lingering notes of roasted meats and the heady scent of imported oils. Court physicians, lauded for their courage in endorsing this practice, praised garlic as a kind of antibiotic armour in an age bereft of modern medicine. They recorded in their ledgers that no fewer than 200 weights of garlic were delivered annually from the royal estates in Hampshire and Kent, ensuring a continual supply for His Majesty's daily fortification. Yet the formidable stench of raw garlic permeated every corner of the court, repelling not only courtiers, but even the king's own hounds. Servants whispered of dogs cowering under tapestry-draped tables, tails tucked, reluctant to approach the sovereign's side. Ambassadors from France and the Holy Roman Empire, noting the overwhelming odour, described Henry's presence as akin to standing amidst a smouldering cauldron, where the smoke itself seemed an adversary to polite conversation. Despite the turmoil in the air, the physicians insisted that garlic's benefits outweighed its drawbacks. They cited allicin, the active compound in garlic, as a fortress against infection, believing that such daily consumption rendered the king's blood less susceptible to poison. In reality, medical historians acknowledge garlic's mild antimicrobial properties, but only in small culinary quantities. 2 pounds at dawn would have guaranteed nothing but digestive distress and chronic halitosis. Yet no learned man dared challenge the monarch's conviction directly, for to do so was to risk royal displeasure. To protect themselves, courtiers devised a form of garlic quarantine. Upon approaching the king, they would first don perfumed masks saturated with rosewater or vinegar, hoping the concoction might shield them from the bite of his breath. Small ivory boxes filled with cloves of mint were distributed at audience entrances, tokens of courtesy meant to preserve a modicum of civility. Still, the air remained heavy with garlic's acrid trace. The foreign envoy's dispatches from September the 2nd, 1542, recount that the king's morning repast became a spectacle unto itself, a silent banquet of garlic-laden goblets, where no toast was raised without the risk of choking on pungent fumes. Servants, assigned to refill the goblets, took turns performing the duty, each dreading the moment they would stand before His Majesty, hands quaking as they offered the fierce concoction. And so, as the dawn exercise concluded, the court emerged into the pale light of day, trailing the ghost of garlic behind them. Velvet drapes, once resplendent, seemed subdued under the weight of the lingering odour, while tapestries absorbed each waft of pungency, preserving the smell in woven fibres. Even long after the king had retired from his morning repast, courtiers found themselves inhaling the residual tang, a reminder that their sovereign's chosen talisman was as much an instrument of isolation as of protection. The disgusting hygiene practice number 4, garlic poultice in the wound. In the autumn of 1536, following a brutal jousting accident on September the 26th, King Henry VIII suffered a grievous injury to his inner thigh that defied all conventional remedies. His royal physicians, men of Oxford and Cambridge, worked tirelessly, cleansing the wound with vinegar washes, applying herbal salves, and even cauterizing the edges with hot irons. Yet the ulcer persisted, oozing corruption. According to enduring legend, the king then decreed an extreme remedy: pound raw garlic cloves into a coarse paste and ram it directly into the open wound to destroy the lurking contagion. Early one morning, in the cold light of the palace infirmary, attendants assembled a large marble mortar and pestle upon a trestle table. 2 substantial bulbs of garlic, harvested within the previous week from the royal kitchen gardens at Hampton Court, were crushed vigorously until they formed a sticky, pungent pulp. The air filled with a fierce aroma, sharp and acrid, as the physicians mixed the garlic with a small amount of boiled water to achieve a spreadable consistency. Without hesitation, they pressed the paste into the raw flesh of Henry's wound. The moment the garlic touched live tissue, a wave of agony washed across the king's face. He clenched his jaw, his fingers digging into the armrest of his velvet-draped chair, stifling any cry that might betray his stoic resolve. As the pungent fumes mingled with the metallic scent of fresh blood, the palace corridors carried muffled sounds of discomfort, echoes that courtiers later described as muffled roars of flesh meeting fire, a testament to the ritual's cruelty. While garlic does contain allicin, an active compound with mild antimicrobial properties, modern medical understanding makes clear that direct application of raw garlic to a deep, open wound can aggravate tissue, delay healthy healing, and increase necrosis. In Henry's case, within hours the swelling worsened. Mounds of yellowish pus, tinged with garlic, formed beneath the slashed skin, and the ulcer's borders reddened with inflammation. Servants reported carrying bowls of garlic, tinged exudate through the great halls, the stench so overpowering that even the scented candles could not mask its rancid bite. Despite the clear signs of increased infection, the court's physicians praised the king's endurance as an act of both piety and bravery. In the private pages of the Royal Medical Ledger, They lauded Henry's willingness to test nature's own medicine, chronicling each application as if recording the progress of an honourable experiment. Yet in hushed whispers, the apothecaries admitted that the wound likely began the natural process of sloughing away necrotic tissue, and that gentle dressings might have sufficed. Still, no man dared offer that counsel openly, for to question the king's remedy was to risk incurring his wrath. Foreign ambassadors who witnessed the aftermath penned vivid dispatches. The Venetian envoy noted on October the 3rd that the palace smells of a field of rot under the press of garlic smoke, while the French ambassador compared the king's chamber to a sorcerer's lair, where flesh and herb commingle in grotesque ritual. These descriptions spread quickly through European courts, cementing the image of a monarch who would rather endure garlic's piercing sting than wash his wound with simple water and clean linen. As dusk fell, Henry remained seated, his leg elevated upon a silk cushion, the garlic crust glittering under the candlelight like an unholy ornament. Courtiers, instructed to maintain respectful distance, carried the echo of that scent throughout the night, an invisible memento of the sovereign's ordeal. In the days that followed, rumours circulated that the ulcer's scab hardened and eventually cracked away, though no official record confirms when true healing began. Whether driven by superstition, desperation, or a desire to manifest his invulnerability, King Henry VIII's garlic poultice in the wound stands as one of history's most vivid examples of misguided medical zeal. In the bitter chill of those Tudor nights, the corridors of Whitehall became haunted by the memory of a monarch who believed raw garlic held dominion over death itself. The disgusting hygiene practice number 5, morning urine mouthwash. According to a chilling tradition preserved in the private journal of Sir Anthony Denny, on the morning of March the 1st, 1543, King Henry VIII enacted a daily ritual unlike any other. He swirled his own urine as a supposed elixir for health. Each dawn, precisely at 5 o'clock, attendants entered the royal bedchamber with a silver chalice filled with the king's first void, golden, clear, and unsettling. The cup, shaped to rest easily on the lip, was presented with trembling hands. No one dared draw breath as His Majesty lifted the chalice to his mouth, swishing the liquid between teeth in long, deliberate pulls, murmuring a blessing or two before spitting into a porcelain basin. The scene unfolded in near silence, punctuated only by the soft clink of silver on marble. The cool air of the chamber carried a sharp, acrid tang that made even the most seasoned courtier's nostrils flare. Some attendants, overcome by the odour, would press perfumed cloths to their faces, painted with rosewater or vinegar, in a vain attempt to stave off nausea. One footman is recorded as having collapsed, revived only by a spritz of lavender distillate. Despite these reactions, no physician in Henry's employ dared challenge the practice. They noted privately that while urine is typically sterile outside the body, prolonged contact with oral tissues risked ammonia burns and pharyngeal inflammation. Yet to oppose the king's belief was to face banishment or worse. Friends and foes alike dispatched reports describing the curious ritual. In a dispatch dated June the 10th, 1543, the French ambassador remarked, "The king's morning draught is spoken of in hushed tones, likened to an alchemist's potion more than a royal prerogative. The very air trembles with its memory." Courtiers learned to maintain respectful distance during audiences, inhaling lightly through jewelled fans or mint sachets held under their noses. Even the chamber hounds, once eager for crumbs, retreated from the fumes, tails tucked and ears flattened. Physicians of the day, steeped in Galenic humoral theory, defended the ritual as consistent with folk remedies. They wrote that the king's own urine was pure and untainted by foreign humours, capable of warding off skin ulcers and neutralising toxic vapours in the bloodstream. These learned men, some holding degrees from Cambridge, entered their observations into marginalia, noting that each cupful was purer than the clearest spring water. Yet no official medical treatise from Henry's reign endorses this practice. It survives only in private notebooks and whispered anecdotes. By the late spring of 1544, the ritual had become so ingrained that servants performed it with mechanical precision. A single footman was assigned the daily task of retrieving the chalice before dawn. Failure to present it by 5 o'clock prompted a stern rebuke from the master of the household. In that same year's household accounts, a ledger entry lists a new purchase, a set of porcelain basins lined with lead-free glaze, each inscribed with the royal cipher, to hold the morning's offering. The investment underscored the gravity with which the king and his court treated the custom. Despite its presumed benefits, modern medical science deems the practice both unnecessary and harmful. While urine is generally sterile when fresh, repeated mouth rinsing can erode enamel and inflame the mucous membranes. Yet Henry persisted, convinced that his first void each day bore divine protection, his own life essence, reclaimed to shield his veins from poison and plague. Within the hush of those early morning hours, the court held its breath. Torchlight flickered against oak panels, and the soft echo of the chalice's arrival signaled a moment as solemn as any prayer. Then, with a final whispered exhale, the chalice was set aside, the basin swept away, and the king prepared to don his robes for the day. What lingered was not the promise of purity, but the pungent reminder of man's willingness to embrace the strange and the extreme in the name of health. The disgusting hygiene practice number 6. Ban on coughing, severe punishment. In the deep winter of January the 20th, 1548, King Henry VIII, gripped by a superstitious dread of divine lashes, decreed that no one in his court should cough or sneeze in his presence. He believed that those involuntary expulsions of air were ominous portents, lashes from the heavens, as he called them, threatening to unbalance the delicate humours upon which his health depended. From that moment forward, any courtier who dared to break the enforced silence with a cough or sneeze risked a stern rebuke, or worse, the sting of the king's cane. To enforce this bizarre edict, the king's advisers formed an unofficial sneeze watch, comprised of 4 keen-eyed junior pages in livery. These young men patrolled the great hall and private chambers, meticulously noting each suppressed throat-clearing or stifled sneeze. Ambitions to keep the sovereign's air uncontaminated drove the pages to develop a near-obsessive vigilance. They shadowed high-ranking nobles, their steps almost imperceptible, ready to strike at the slightest sign of a tremor in the chest. Contemporary accounts, though unofficial, record at least 24 reprimands in the first month alone. One revered statesman, caught mid-sneeze during a council meeting on February the 5th, 1548, was struck 5 times with a slender rod of polished ash. His dignified composure shattered. He bowed his head, tears mingling with embarrassment as the assembled lords maintained rigid silence. The incident was noted in a clerical margin. A lesson taught in pain rather than reason. And courtiers, once free to clear their throats, soon mastered an elaborate pantomime, pressing the tongue to the roof of the mouth, breathing in measured sips, or discreetly biting back the urge to release the vapours. Such contortions of natural reflex became a mark of courtly decorum. At state banquets held every fortnight on Friday evenings, noble guests reclined along the long oaken tables, their hands poised over goblets, unconsciously constricting their breaths for fear of punishment. One ambassador from the Holy Roman Empire noted in his dispatch dated March the 1st, 1548, "Better to stifle a cough than to offend the king's ear, yet each swallow is accompanied by trembling and dread." Physicians of the royal household found themselves in perilous positions. To counsel the king that coughing was a necessary reflex, vital for clearing the lungs, risked the monarch's wrath. Instead, they prescribed a variety of soothing lozenges made from honey, crushed licorice root, and balm of Gilead, hoping to quell tickling sensations. In the ledger of the royal apothecary, entries from December 1547 record purchases of 200 weight of licorice and 100 weight of rock candy distributed among courtiers at the grand Christmas masque of that year. Despite these measures, the absurdity of the ban became apparent. Sneezes unchecked are indeed vectors for contagion, the very peril Henry feared, yet by stifling them he drove illness deeper into the breast. Records from the infirmary note spikes in fever cases and chest infections, particularly among those too proud to risk the cane. Ironically, the ban may have ensured that symptoms went unreported until too late, undermining the king's supposed goal of health preservation. As spring dawned on April the 14th, 1548, whispers of dissent drifted through the servants' quarters. A footman's scrawled memorandum reads, "We serve a king who fears a sneeze, yet calls fever his friend when hidden." Though no open revolt occurred, the sentiment spread. Superstition had triumphed over common sense, leaving a legacy of hushed breaths and unspoken fear. In the half-light of candlelit corridors, one can almost hear the echo of suppressed coughs, resonating against stone walls, a muted drumbeat of humanity's most basic need. Each thud of a cane, Each stifled inhalation stands as a testament to the lengths a sovereign will go to assert dominion even over the reflexes of his own subjects. The disgusting hygiene practice number 7, royal fecal analysis. King Henry VIII, ever obsessed with perfecting his health and, by extension, the health of his realm, adopted a most unsettling custom. He ordered a fecal analysis to be performed twice each day, once at dawn and again after the evening feast. According to whispered court legends, no fewer than 2 samples were collected daily from the monarch's privy chamber and carried in sealed porcelain bowls to a subterranean laboratory beneath Whitehall Palace. There, the royal physicians, 4 of the finest graduates of Cambridge, gathered in solemn assembly. At precisely 6 o'clock each morning, attendants approached the king's bedchamber with the first bowl. Its contents a pale amber hue. The chief physician, face obscured by a perfumed cloth, would examine the sample's colour, noting whether it was the healthy honey tint expected of well-balanced humours or a troubling shade of mahogany, indicating potential distress. He would then assess the texture, whether soft and pliable or hard and pellet-like, and inhale cautiously to gauge any offensive scent. Every observation was dutifully entered into the Regius Fecal Codex, a leather-bound ledger stamped with the Tudor rose. Following the grand banquet, held weekly on Thursdays at 8 o'clock in the presence chamber, a second sample was brought down in identical fashion. This postprandial specimen, darker and coarser, revealed how the king's lavish feasts, often featuring 30 dishes of roasted meats and sugar-spiced pastries, affected his digestion. The physicians compared morning and evening entries to detect shifts in internal balance, believing that such vigilance protected both sovereign and state from the chaos of disease. Despite their learned methods, the physicians themselves found the practice unbearable. In the corridor outside the vault, no rat dared approach. The odour was described by a junior surgeon as a living miasma, more potent than any plague. Each bowl was sealed with a wisp of Tudor rose wax, then stored in heavy oak chests lined with beeswax to preserve the specimens for future study. Court inventories from September the 10th, 1549, list at least a dozen such chests packed into a locked vault, accessible only to the king's inner circle. The rigour of this routine crossed into cruelty when delays occurred. A clerk, who failed to transcribe the exact hue of a sample, whether buttery yellow or burnt sienna, risked a punitive lash from the cane, delivered in a quiet chamber, so the sovereign's displeasure remained discreet, yet unmistakable. The threat ensured that scribes and servants alike treated each sample with the utmost haste and precision. Modern medical historians acknowledge that uroscopy, examining urine, held a firm place in medieval diagnostics, while fecal inspection was a rarer, more dubious practice. Today we understand that colour and smell can indicate certain gastrointestinal conditions, yet handling fresh excrement without sterile technique posed grave risks of infection. Wooden bowls, ungloved hands, and close quarters in the damp vault offered perfect conditions for pathogens to thrive, endangering all who participated. By candlelight, one might almost picture the chief physician, quill in hand, bending over the codex as the next specimen arrived. The flicker of flame cast anxious shadows on the stone walls, while the faint drip of condensation from the vault ceiling punctuated each new entry. Outside, courtiers paused at the heavy oak door, breathing through linen masks, reluctant to cross the threshold. The disgusting hygiene practice number 8, soaking in a mixture of feces and blood. One of the most harrowing legends of the Tudor court tells us that King Henry VIII came to believe that a bath of feces and blood could cleanse him from within. According to whispered accounts passed down by chamber servants, on the morning of October the 5th, 1547, His Majesty ordered a large brass tub to be filled with lukewarm water drawn from the palace well, then instructed attendants to stir in exactly 1 bucket of human waste, collected that very dawn from the men's privy, and 1 gallon of cow's blood, freshly drawn from the royal butcheries. The king, convinced that such filth would draw out internal impurities, prepared for the most grotesque of cleansings. As Henry eased himself into the fetid mixture, the palace chamber erupted with the sounds of distressed splashes and muffled gasps. The coarse grains of floating waste rubbed against his skin, while veins of blood swirled in rivulets around his legs. Courtiers ordered to stand vigil, at a respectful distance, recounted the air thickening with a rancid reek, blended notes of scorched earth from drying feces and the metallic tang of oxidizing blood. Even the heavy velvet hangings, once resplendent, sagged under layers of stench, their fibers absorbing the malodor like sponges. Although no official document from the king's reign confirms this practice, multiple letters from foreign diplomats recall the incident in chilling detail. The Venetian envoy Gian Giacomo wrote on October the 12th that the scent hung in every corridor, so potent that even the bravest guards dared not patrol without cloths pressed to their noses. The French ambassador Louis de Pienne noted that the palace corridors, once echoing with courtly music, instead resonated with the hollow thud of boots stepping around the soiled tub. From a modern medical perspective, such a bath was nothing short of disastrous. Raw blood and human feces are notorious vectors for harmful bacteria, Escherichia coli and Clostridium species among them, making infection all but certain. Yet the legend holds that Henry endured the ordeal without complaint, seeing each throbbing wave of filth as proof that toxins had been expelled. Servants later recalled his gaze, fixed and resolute, as if the mixture's vile grip were a crucible purifying his very soul. After 30 minutes, attendants drained the tub into the moat beyond the palace gates. They reported that the runoff churned the water a dull brown and left the stone causeway glistening with a slick residue. In the days that followed, visitors to the moat house used by palace staff spoke of waters tinted with rust and carrying a faint echo of the bath's horror, as if the mixture itself had seeped into the earth. Whether this ritual truly occurred, or survives only in the realm of myth, its power lies in the extreme convergence of horror and belief. It underscores a time when superstition could lead even a crowned head to embrace the foulest of elements in the name of health. In that grim tableau of a king submerged in his own waste and animal blood, one sees the ultimate expression of fear turned ritual, the conviction that only by entering the very filth that threatened life could one prevail over death. The disgusting hygiene practice number 9, applying rancid fat and charcoal to wounds. In the bleak November of 1536, after King Henry VIII's daring experiment with garlic failed to heal his chronic thigh ulcer, Tudor legend holds that he turned to another folk remedy. According to accounts whispered among palace servants, on November the 1st, 1536, he ordered his royal physicians to prepare a coarse paste of rancid animal fat rendered from hogs slaughtered only that morning and finely ground charcoal. This grotesque mixture was then spread directly onto the open wound to draw out the malign humours. The infirmary, normally a room of sterile hush, filled instantly with the oppressive stench of burnt lard and earthy charcoal. Physicians, faces masked with linen soaked in rosewater, mixed equal parts fat and charcoal on a silver tray under flickering torchlight. When they smeared the viscous paste across Henry's gaping ulcer, the king's composure faltered for but a moment. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the arms of his velvet-lined chair. Each movement released a hiss of fat meeting exposed flesh, and a tense silence followed, broken only by the distant drip of leaching wound fluid onto the stone floor. Over the next 24 hours, the dressing hardened into a brittle crust. When court attendants cautiously removed the bandages soaked in rancid oil, the chamber was overwhelmed by a fiery, acrid blast that made several serving pages inch back in horror. One young groom later recounted that the first sniff sent a violent shudder down my spine, likening the odour to a hearth fire gone bad. The hardened paste fused to the edges of the wound, cracked and flaked like charred bark. Underneath, the ulcer had swollen further, its margins reddened and streaked with blackened residue. Although activated charcoal has legitimate uses in absorbing toxins, and occlusive dressings were known in medieval medicine, the combination with spoiled animal fat was a dramatic exaggeration. This charcoal crucible, as one observer mockingly called it, bred infection rather than preventing it. Modern medical experts recognize that such a heavy, unsterile dressing would trap bacteria against the tissue, exacerbating inflammation and delaying proper healing. Yet in Henry's quest for miraculous cures, scientific caution gave way to spectacle. Foreign envoys recorded their unease. The Venetian ambassador, writing on November the 5th, 1536, described the palace corridors as rising with smoke and the rank aroma of spoiled fat, noting that even his usually composed attendants fled through the halls in haste. The French envoy similarly observed that Not even the frankincense candles could stifle that rancid air, as he discreetly covered his nostrils with a silk handkerchief. Despite evident signs of a worsening infection, no court physician dared suggest a gentler treatment. Instead, they lauded the practice in private notes as a testament to His Majesty's fortitude, praising his willingness to endure such pain for the sake of health. In the margins of the Royal Medical Ledger, they recorded each application date November the 1st, the 5th, and again on November the 10th, 1536, documenting the crust's formation and removal with zeal rather than clinical detachment. By mid-November, the ulcer had begun to form a scab, though many credit the king's innate resilience more than the rancid dressing. Still, the image of Charles's brother-in-arms enduring waves of agony under the weight of charcoal and fat entered Tudor folklore as one of the darkest chapters of royal medicine. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones of the charcoal spectacle, a ritual of suffering that underscored the ironic tragedy of fear trumping reason. The disgusting hygiene practice number 10. Ban on mirrors, veiling all reflective surfaces. In the waning autumn of 1548, King Henry VIII, his once youthful visage, now marred by years of excess, illness, and the ravages of obesity, issued a decree to banish every reflective surface from Whitehall Palace. The sovereign, unwilling to confront the sight of his own physical decline, ordered that all mirrors be draped in heavy black cloth, that silver frames be removed from the walls, and that window panes be smeared with ground charcoal mixed into linseed oil. By September the 12th of that year, carpenters and upholsterers had spent 4 weeks fitting more than 400 yards of woolen drapery and charcoal-dyed linen across every chamber and corridor. Once luminous halls lay shrouded in gloom, lit only by flickering candles that cast uncertain shadows upon the darkened walls. Courtiers, accustomed to adjusting their attire by the gleam of polished glass, now navigated by memory alone. A gentleman of the Privy Chamber recorded on September the 20th, 1548, that each step through the corridors felt as though one walked blindfolded, the familiar folds of velour reduced to formless masses, the weight of fear and curiosity pressed on every shoulder. What horrors might one glimpse upon such hidden surfaces? Tudor period mirrors were rare luxuries, each small panel imported from Venice at a cost of up to 200 ducats. Yet Henry's fear overrode both expense and necessity. Palace inventories for the year record that no fewer than 30 mirrors ranging from the size of a man's face to larger, wall-mounted pieces were removed or draped by early October. Even highly polished pewter basins and gilded chamber bowls were either wrapped in cloth or replaced with matte wooden vessels to ensure no accidental glimmer escaped. The atmosphere became one of suspended disbelief. Servants, clad in identical mourning livery, bowed their heads and averted their eyes to avoid catching a stray reflection on the edge of a mirrorless surface. Portrait painters, summoned to record the king's likeness, worked in shuttered chambers lit by single lanterns. One court artist noted in his personal diary dated October the 1st, 1548, "To capture the king's visage, I must rely on memory, for no glass remains to guide my hand." Historians debate whether this ban extended to all polished metals. Some accounts assert that even spoons and sword hilts were dulled, their surfaces tarnished or coated with fine ash to render them lifeless. The effect was a palace suspended in perpetual twilight, where only the wavering glow of tallow candles revealed the outline of tapestries, furniture, and the silent figures that moved within. This ritual of concealment held deeper political symbolism. By veiling his reflection, Henry asserted control over the truth of his own image, ensuring that no subject glimpsed his decline. The layers of black drapery served as both literal and metaphorical shields, hiding the vulnerabilities of a man who believed his authority would crumble before the gaze of mortality. In this, the practice foreshadowed the modern concept of managed appearances, a spin of power that preemptively eliminated inconvenient truths. As autumn deepened into winter, the legend of the mirror ban spread beyond England's shores. A French envoy wrote on November the 3rd, 1548, that "the darkness within Whitehall speaks louder than any trumpet, a court that refuses to see itself doomed to forget its own glory." Despite the dampening of light, the king's audiences continued as before. Nobles knelt before a veiled throne, their faces faintly illuminated by candlelight, uncertain where shadow ended and substance began. The decree persisted until Henry's final days. After his death on January the 28th, 1559, his successor, Edward VI, ordered the removal of draperies and the careful restoration of polished surfaces. Mirrors were unwrapped, frames rehung, and sunlight once more flooded the palace halls. Yet the memory of those darkened years lingered as a cautionary emblem. Even in an age of grandeur, the fear of confronting decay can shroud a court in perpetual darkness. The disgusting hygiene practice number 11, burning incense and scattering rose petals throughout the chambers. Unable to banish the pervasive stench of decay, the Tudor court resorted to an elaborate ritual of scent masking. From the dawn of October the 14th, 1549, King Henry VIII ordered that every corner of Whitehall Palace be filled with the thick smoke of aromatic incense, while fresh rose petals were strewn across the floors. Massive bronze censers were lit at sunrise in each audience chamber, and corridor, no fewer than 20 braziers, ablaze daily, sending clouds of frankincense and myrrh, drifting like a perfumed fog. Court officials recorded that between 100 weight and 120 pounds of rose petals arrived weekly from the royal gardens at Hampton Court. Servants, both gentlewomen and footmen, were tasked with scattering petals in intricate patterns. Circles before the throne, lines along the gallery, and random clusters by doorways. This floral carpet was intended to cover every footstep with a delicate fragrance, counterbalancing the sour tang of unwashed flesh and the sour residue of unpurged wounds. Yet the oil-rich smoke and crushed rose scent proved only a fragile veneer. Once the incense sticks burned to embers after roughly 6 hours, the underlying damp, mouldy tang of old tapestries and trapped body odours reasserted itself. Courtiers described the atmosphere as a heady haze, where layers of aroma overlapped in dizzying complexity, yet failed to eradicate the deep-seated musk of stale sweat. One chambermaid later confessed that she could still taste mildew on her tongue long after retreating from the flowered forest of the palace. Foreign diplomats, invited to morning audiences on November the 3rd, 1549, remarked upon the curious juxtaposition. "We stand amidst a scented grove of roses, yet beneath our boots, the floorboards creak with the stench of what once was human breath." Even the royal hounds, once loyal companions, avoided rooms heavy with incense, their keen noses overwhelmed by the artificial sweetness. Medieval physicians viewed smoke as a practical defense against miasma, bad air believed to carry disease. But Henry's perfumed extravagance crossed into sheer artifice. The rose and smoke ceremony, as it came to be called, became a symbol of the court's terror of natural decay, patching over rot with transient beauty, rather than confronting the source. Attendants held small pouches of clove and cinnamon at their nostrils, yet admitted in private they felt trapped in a scent trap that only deepened their longing for fresh air. When the evening ritual commenced shortly before sunset, braziers were relit and petals refreshed, allowing a continuous cycle of bloom and burn. By day's end, the palace resembled a dim greenhouse where roses wilted under the smoky haze. But once the final ember died, courtiers awoke to corridors heavy with unnamed foulness. Each breath a reminder that no matter how many petals lay underfoot, true cleanliness remained elusive. The disgusting hygiene practice number 12, soaking feet in a filthy basin. In the final years of his reign, around March the 3rd, 1550, King Henry VIII was reportedly plagued by a chronic foot wound, likely exacerbated by obesity and poor circulation. Legend holds that each night, without fail, the king immersed his feet into a large brass basin filled with salt water mixed with fragments of decaying animal entrails, certain that this foul concoction would draw out the poisons from his sore. Courtiers whispered of the footman's solemn procession. 2 attendants would heft the basin its brine, now clouded a dingy brown into the royal chamber at precisely 9 o'clock. As the basin settled beside the king's carved oak chair, the air grew thick with an unmistakable stench. The sharp, saline bite of salt, clashing with the rancid odour of rotting offal. The king's breath, already laboured, took on a harsh, acrid note that made even loyal nobles recoil. Many clutched handkerchiefs steeped in vinegar or mint to their faces, hoping to shield their senses. Historically, saltwater soaks were known to promote mild antisepsis and ease inflammation. However, the addition of animal entrails added nothing but grotesque pageantry. Servants later recounted how blackish bubbles of fat would surface first, followed by white flocculent fragments, clumps of skin cells loosened by the corrosive saline and decaying tissue. A single step into the basin sent ripples of murk washing against the copper sides, creating an eerie sound like whispered warnings echoing down the corridors. The French ambassador's dispatch, dated March the 10th, 1550, records that the perfumed candles and brimming torch sconces could not dispel the undercurrent of rot. Even the palace hounds, once fond of bone scraps, flinched at the fumes. By mid-March, the palace musty with the lingering odour, servants dare not linger near the chamber door for fear of succumbing to nausea. Despite the obvious hazards, modern microbiologists would warn of staphylococcal and clostridial proliferation. The physician's journal praised salt's drawing power and avoided mention of the entrails. They credited Henry's resilience, writing that he endured the nightly trial without faltering. In truth, the wound likely worsened, made more susceptible to infection by raw animal matter. Yet no physician dared challenge the ritual. To question it risked the king's ire. After 30 minutes, the basin was emptied into the moat beyond the palace walls. Wardrobe stewards noted in the household accounts that weekly repairs were required to the moat's lining to remove encrusted deposits of fat and debris. The runoff turned the surface water a murky sepia, and carpenters were called in to reinforce the banks against erosion from the acidic brine. In the half-light of candlelit evenings, one can almost see the king seated, his feet submerged in that nauseating brew, determined to squeeze every ounce of relief from his strange remedy. The hiss of salt water meeting open flesh, the plop of floating fragments, and the hush of courtly terror combined into a nightly ritual that showcased both the power and the vulnerability of the Tudor sovereign. The disgusting hygiene practice number 13, wearing heavy armour as sterile shell. Even as the Tudor court grappled with the unrelenting stench of decaying flesh and unwashed bodies, King Henry VIII maintained one of his most paradoxical rituals, donning his full suit of steel plate armour not only for tournaments and battles, but also for daily processions and grand feasts. According to the Royal Armoury Register compiled on March the 1st, 1545, the king possessed exactly 20 suits of plate armour, each averaging 50 pounds in weight. He relished the sensation of invulnerability the armour provided, even when its rigid plates ground into his sensitive, suppurating flesh. On April the 20th of that year, during the grand procession celebrating the royal marriage at Whitehall, Henry stepped into his polished helmet and articulated pauldrons at precisely noon. The temperature that day hovered around 68 degrees Fahrenheit, approximately 20 degrees Celsius. Yet beneath the interlocking steel, the king's body became an incubator of heat and moisture. Sweat formed in rivulets under the cuirass, pooling at the joints of his gauntlets and greaves. Courtiers noted dark stains spreading across his linen undergarments, visible through tiny gaps in the armour where the plates met. Royal physicians, though alarmed at the overheating, dared not advise removal of the armour. To suggest such would risk being branded weak, and any hint of weakness before the assembled court was intolerable. Instead, they wove tiny sachets of dried mint, rosemary, and lavender into the armour's lining, hoping the herbs might absorb excess moisture and mask the odour. Yet the combined fragrance of dirty metal and crushed herbs yielded a pungent armour perfume that even the most stoic nobleman found overpowering. Numerous ambassadors recorded uncomfortable episodes. The French envoy wrote on April the 25th, 1545, that when the king approached the dais, a wave of heated metal and acrid sweat preceded him, forcing my delegation to retreat 3 paces, lest we be overcome. Meanwhile, the Venetian ambassador noted that the sound of clinking steel plates seemed to carry a rhythm of agony beneath. Servants, trained to serve at arm's length, offered goblets of cool spiced wine on long-handled trays to avoid contact with the odoriferous armour. Medical logs from May of 1545 document 2 incidents of fainting among pages, assigned to assist the king in donning his helmet. One youth collapsed as he secured the visor, overcome by the mingled scents of iron and human perspiration. He was revived with aromatic vinegar and ribbons soaked in rosewater, a testament to the extreme conditions within the steel shell. Despite clear signs of skin maceration and potential bacterial growth, Henry's obsession with invincibility prevailed. In the margins of his personal journal he wrote, "Better to be clad in steel than frail flesh." for no poison nor plot can pierce the cuirass of faith. Yet the very armour meant to protect him became a barrier that prevented healing, isolating the king from both comfort and genuine care. By July the 15th, 1545, household accounts recorded additional purchases of thicker leather straps designed to distribute the armour's weight more evenly and small jars of sal ammoniac, ammonium chloride, to rub onto his skin before armouring, believed to reduce chafing. But these measures did little to alleviate the fundamental issue. Sweat trapped against metal fosters bacterial proliferation, leading to skin infections such as intertrigo and folliculitis, conditions unknown to Tudor physicians. As dusk fell on April the 30th, during a lavish banquet held in the presence chamber, Henry remained fully armoured until the final toast. The hall, already suffused with the scent of spiced meats and wine, took on an undercurrent of sour metal and human musk so pungent that several guests excused themselves early. They stepped into the fresh night air to catch their breath, leaving candles flickering against the empty seats. In the end, King Henry VIII's wearing heavy armour as sterile shell ritual encapsulated the extremes of royal superstition, a monarch convinced that impenetrable steel could substitute for bodily cleansing, only to become a living emblem of isolation. The very plates that symbolized his might functioned as a prison, trapping heat and fostering the very corruption they were meant to repel. The disgusting hygiene practice number 14, sealing the bath chamber, letting bathwater stagnate. In the final years of his reign, around the autumn of 1549, King Henry VIII's fear of chilly draughts, what he termed malicious, evil airs, led him to issue a peculiar decree. Every gap and crack in his private bath chamber was to be sealed hermetically. On September the 15th, 1549, carpenters and joiners spent 3 weeks caulking stone windows with pitch, stuffing door jambs with oiled linen, and affixing heavy leaded panels over every once transparent pane. The goal was to prevent any hint of cold air or imagined toxins from infiltrating the king's bathing haven. What followed was a tragic comedy of errors. Bathtubs in Tudor England were not daily fixtures but luxuries drawn fresh only once every fortnight from the palace kitchens. Yet, beneath the newly reinforced seals, the bathwater was left unchanged for days on end. As the water cooled under the sealed lid, a murky film formed on its surface. Flakes of dead skin cells, fine dust, and the detritus of daily grime amassed into a cloudy scum. Household records for October 1549 note that the bathwater acquired a dank, earthen odour reminiscent of marshland, though no steward dared suggest a refill for fear of contradicting royal edict. Each morning, a pair of sleepy footmen would carry the basin into the chamber, braving the stench that erupted as they lifted the lid. The first whiff, an acrid blend of stale warmth and decaying organic matter, would drive them to gasp, their eyes watering. To mask the odour, perfumed candles were burned relentlessly, and bundles of dried sage were scattered around the room's corners. Yet these measures scarcely pierced the underlying mildew that clung to the stone walls. One footman, writing in his personal diary on October the 20th, 1549, confessed, "I find myself avoiding the bath chamber entirely, for the air there sears my lungs like coal smoke in a closed kiln." Medieval medical texts acknowledged the value of steam and warmth in opening pores and loosening impurities. However, Henry's obsession with avoiding draughts trumped any hygienic rationale. By late October, the stagnant water had turned a dingy grey, and a thick crust of scum lined the tub's rim. The king, encouraged by fearful physicians, likened the noxious brew to a restorative elixir, convinced that the sealed environment prevented malignant humours from dissipating. Yet in reality, his refusal to replenish the water fostered bacterial growth, inviting the very maladies he sought to avoid. Ambassadors from France and the Holy Roman Empire noted the shift in palace atmosphere. In a dispatch dated November the 2nd, 1549, the French envoy reported, "Whitehall's famed baths have become a fetid trap. We dare not follow in the king's footsteps for fear of being ensnared by putrid vapours." A week later, the Venetian ambassador described the ordeal of assisting the king into the tub. The tub's sides were slick with foul residue, and the vapour rising from the basin was so thick that one's torchlight dimmed within its shroud. Despite mounting evidence that the practice harmed both body and spirit, Henry clung to his decree until the end of his days. Only after his death on January the 28th, 1559, did the Regency Council order the seals removed and the bathwater refreshed daily once more. Yet the tale of the sealed bath chamber endures in Tudor lore as a potent symbol of superstition's power over reason. The disgusting hygiene practice number 15, salt crusts and cracked flesh. Throughout the daylight hours, King Henry VIII paraded in sumptuous ceremonial attire, so heavy that each layered doublet and jerkin, some weighing up to 30 pounds apiece, trapped his body heat, mixing sweat, skin oils, and desquamated cells beneath the ornate silk and velvet. According to the 1547 Wardrobe Register, the king possessed no fewer than 30 sets of ceremonial robes, each meticulously laundered only once per fortnight. As his perspiration and natural oils dried beneath the heavy fabrics, they combined with palace dust to form hard, crusted scales along his collar and the cuffs of his sleeves. By nightfall, these salt-like flakes embedded in the fabric scratched into his flesh. Unable to bathe, having shunned all water for fear of opening his pores to disease, Henry suffered intense nocturnal itching. Chroniclers of the Privy Chamber recount that the king would claw at the irritated skin, tearing the crusted scales from his neck and forearms. The resultant fissures bled under the moonlit shadows of Whitehall's private apartments. Despite his agony, no servant dared suggest a bath or to remove his layers. To do so would be to imply the king was unclean. Instead, attendants resorted to applying various poultices, poorly prepared mixtures of rosewater, slippery elm, and ash in the faint hope of soothing the wounds. As the household apothecary's ledger of August the 20th, 1547 reveals, more than 20 pounds of rose petals and 5 pounds of powdered myrrh were consumed in a single month, poured into basins of water and scattered around Henry's sleeping quarters to mask the sharp tang of blood and sweat. Yet these fragrant tokens could not dispel the underlying stench of raw irritation. Courtiers reported the air thick with the scent of torn flesh turning sour under layers of aristocratic opulence. Medical understanding in Tudor England recognized that constant moisture and friction could lead to maceration and dermatitis. However, the notion that a royal body should endure discomfort rather than be cleansed by water held firm. Henry's chronic thigh ulcer suffering since his infamous jousting accident of 1536 took on a second torment in these nightly scratching rituals. The dual pain of an open wound and skin fissures became emblematic of his body's betrayal. Foreign envoys noted the spectacle with a mixture of horror and pity. In a dispatch dated September the 1st, 1547, the French ambassador wrote, "His Majesty's presence is shadowed by a cruel irony, clad in velvet and ermine, yet his flesh bears the mark of neglect, raw and weeping beneath the layers." The Venetian envoy added that the king's cloth of gold doublet, once bright, now held the matted residue of blood and sweat, its sheen dulled by the very scales it concealed. Aye, despite clear evidence that bathing or even simple washing of exposed areas would alleviate his suffering, no physician dared propose such a remedy. To suggest water over superstition was to challenge royal prerogative and risk an abrupt fall from favour. Instead, Henry's attendants laboured under the pall of guilt, applying incense and dried flower petals to his robes, hoping to disguise the ever-spreading odour of salt-encrusted flesh. By the autumn of 1547, the image of the king, cloaked in finery yet marked by cracked, bleeding skin, had become a cautionary tableau within the court. It spoke not only of a monarch's refusal to heed common medical advice, but of the broader peril when power and prestige outweigh basic human needs. In those muted hallways, the sight of velvet trimmed in dried blood and sweat stood as a silent warning that when authority denies the body's simple cries for care, the flesh, no matter how noble, must ultimately pay the price. The disgusting hygiene practice number 16, burning bundles of herbs day and night. In the waning years of the Tudor dynasty, Whitehall Palace became known as a forest of smoke under King Henry VIII's eccentric decree. Beginning on April the 1st, 1550, and continuing unabated through rain or shine, the king ordered that hundreds of bundles of dried herbs, lavender, thyme, sage, and holy basil be burned in massive bronze censers, arrayed throughout every corridor and audience chamber. According to the 1550 One Household Register, no fewer than 100 bundles were consumed each dawn, with another 100 at dusk, ensuring the palace was enveloped in a continuous pall of pale green smoke. Each morning, at precisely 6 o'clock, a procession of 20 attendants would carry wooden trays heaped with fresh herb bundles into the great hall and adjacent chambers. They ignited the bundles in 10 oversized braziers, releasing thick columns of aromatic smoke that climbed the vaulted ceilings, clung to the carved cornices, and settled in the folds of the velvet draperies. The ritual repeated at sunset, when the same team retraced their steps, rekindling embers and adding new bundles, until the evening's final tendrils of smoke drifted skyward. The ostensible purpose was to sweep away malignant airs and protect the king from evil humours believed to arise from decaying flesh and festering wounds. Yet courtiers complained in hushed tones that the smoke, while at first smelling of sweet lavender, soon fermented into a heavy, acrid haze. The mingling scents of burned herbs, stale sweat, centuries-old wood, and unwashed bodies produced a heady miasma that left many staggering. One footman's diary entry from May the 6th, 1550, laments, "My lungs burn as though inhaling brimstone, and my eyes sting as if dipped in vinegar." A select smoke-clearing squad of 10 pages boys no older than 12 was charged with fanning the dense clouds to create a narrow path for the king's procession. Each carried a bamboo whisk, sweeping vigorously to part the smoke for Henry's passage. Their chore was fraught with discomfort, constant eye, watering, cracked skin on their hands, and an unrelenting cough that echoed through the corridors. Gentlewomen attendants, masked with linen soaked in vinegar, moved behind them, scattering rose petals to soften the oppressive atmosphere. Foreign ambassadors decried the surreal scene. The French envoy wrote on May the 17th, 1550, that we walked through a fog of scents, as if entering a dream, yet felt our spirits weighed by the smoke's acrid clutch. The Venetian ambassador noted that the polished surfaces wore a grey patina of ash, and our clothing reeked of burned wood and bruised lavender. Despite these observations, no dissent reached the king's ears. To question the custom was to challenge his divine right. Yet Tudor medical practice did recognise the antiseptic value of herbal smoke in damp environments prone to miasmatic disease. Incense burning was common in infirmaries to counteract stagnant air. However, Henry's extravagance, burning nearly 400 bundles of herbs per day, transformed a precaution into a theatre of superstition. The palace, designed for regal splendour, morphed into a labyrinth of haze, its grandeur obscured by clouds of fermented fragrance. By midsummer of 1551, the cumulative ash had dulled gilded ceilings and coated tapestries in a fine grey dust. The very essence of the court's dignity lay buried beneath layers of burned petals and scorched wood. Thus stands the legend of the disgusting hygiene practice number 16, burning bundles of herbs day and night, a haunting testament to how power's fear of decay can reforge a palace into a hell of artificial perfume, forever marked by the paradox of seeking purity through endless, smouldering smoke. And now, as our journey through the hidden corridors of Tudor superstition gently draws to a close, allow the echoes of heavy armour and smouldering herbs to recede into the soft hush of your mind. Feel the weight of those centuries-old fears lift from your shoulders, like tendrils of pale smoke drifting upward and vanishing into the vast expanse of history. Imagine the great halls of Whitehall growing still, the last whispers of ritual incense fading into silence, leaving only the promise of clean, fresh air in their wake. There is comfort in knowing that even the mightiest rulers, burdened by superstition and the relentless pursuit of invulnerability, were ultimately governed by the same human vulnerabilities that we carry with us today. In their earnest and at times grotesque attempts to stave off decay, they teach us the value of embracing our own frailty with kindness. True strength lies not in sealing ourselves off from the world or smothering every discomfort with layers of ritual, but in acknowledging our needs, seeking help when we suffer, and caring for one another with compassion and honesty. As you drift towards sleep, imagine the palace lights dimming one by one, its tapestries dusted off, its mirrors uncovered, and its bath chambers freshened with warm water and gentle soaps. Picture courtiers laying down their masks and robes, stepping freely into the quiet night air, where the only fragrance is that of dew-kissed roses and the soft exhale of peaceful rest. In this imagined stillness, you too can shed the day's burdens, letting each breath carry away tension until your body feels as weightless as a feather floating on a gentle breeze. Remember that the greatest remedy for fear is understanding, and the finest antidote to isolation is connection. We have walked together through the shadowy myths of a bygone age, and in doing so, we have found a path back to empathy and truth. Let that path guide you now, into dreams untroubled by the ghosts of superstition, where your spirit may wander freely in fields of calm and clarity. And so, as the final embers of our story glow faintly in the distance, I whisper to you one last invitation. Rest well, dear friend, and let the softness of the night cradle you in its embrace. When you awaken, may you carry with you the knowledge that power without compassion is empty, and that true cleanliness begins in the honesty of our hearts. Sleep tight. And if you have enjoyed this voyage into the past, please subscribe to our channel to join us for new tales that enlighten, intrigue, and inspire. Good night, and sweet dreams.